For tonight's battle report, we have 40 points of Soviet forces. This is a mechanized infantry battalion led by the battalion commander with a BMP-2. He is supported by 2 BMP-2 companies, each with 4 large bases, 3 small bases, and 4 BMP-2s, 4 T-72s, and 2 Mi-24 Hinds. So we'll see how this stacks up against the American forces tonight. The Americans have brought 40 points of their own, also a mechanized infantry company. Right here is their company commander and his trusty 113. He's supported by 2 infantry platoons, 4 large bases, 3 small bases, each in 113s. And then the core of the American Army is these 3 M1 tanks and 1 platoon, and they're supported by the VADs in order to bring some much needed air defense to the battle.
What is the location?
We are utilizing one of the missions from the quick mission set that was recently published by Battlefront. This one's going to be free for all. The Americans have rolled and will be the attacker. The time of day is dusk, meaning that starting turn 3, we'll roll to sea if it becomes nighttime, which would be a huge advantage to the Americans. The Americans have placed their objectives here on the left in the big growth of trees, and on the right just behind that cornfield. Deployment zones are 12 inches up. In the middle of the board, we have a small farmstead supported by a little road network with lots of crop fields. And on the right, a little bit more trees. And from the Soviet side, 2 patches of trees in order for them to defend from. You can see a Soviet objective here on the left and one here on the right. The board is 4x4. On the right you see a river. Neither side brought its bridging equipment, so everything's going to be confined to the left side of the board. It's all part of the quick mission type rule set in which you play with smaller points, smaller board. And interestingly enough, in order to win tonight's game, you don't have to control one of the opponent's objectives. You just need to get one of your tanks or infantry within 4 inches of it and have none of the enemies within 4 inches of your own. So I imagine this is going to be a very quick game, as advertised on the Battlefront site. We'll be back with the deployment of US and Soviet forces. The Americans have completed their deployment with the company commander positioning themselves on his right flank with this infantry platoon and their associated 113s. The other infantry platoon also starts the game in foxholes, is supported by the VADs and then these M1 tanks, while their 113s have taken to the road network in order to try to approach the Soviet objectives on the left flank. The Soviets have also positioned their troops in cover and in foxholes, starting with this infantry company on the left, dug into this line of trees and supported by their BMP-2s in the back. T-72s deployed after the Americans' M1s and decided to make good use of the cover that those buildings will provide for the first turn. While the company commander is here on the right, making sure that those M1s and 113s don't approach too quickly and give the Soviets a defeat before they have a chance to strike at the Americans. Turn 1 for the Americans began with the commander making an assessment, knowing nighttime was about to fall. He ordered his 113s on the left flank to remain in place, poised, but not ready to quite move forward yet, while the infantry company stayed dug in near this objective. It's a medium engagement. Neither side expected this fight. Neither one prepared to begin shooting missiles at the very onset of the battle, so the American infantry just had to stay in place. But these M1 tanks boldly moved out to the right, knowing that at this range the Soviet T-72s posed little threat. 2 tanks managed to get line of sight through those buildings at T-72s. T-72s of course were in cover, meaning the Americans needed 4s to hit. But this tank on the right did just that, landing a hit against the T-72 down there, which failed its 3+ armor save, but then, surprisingly, the M1 tank failed its firepower check, meaning the tank was just bailed out. The crew probably hiding somewhere amongst those infantry, waiting for things to settle down. The American commander stayed here on the right, along with this platoon, waiting for the eventual Soviet attack to come, knowing they would be forced to act before nighttime came, and the Americans owned the night. The Soviets start their turn one by remounting the tank crew into its beast of war and moving them straight forward up the middle. This BMP-2 company has moved out, staying just out of range of the Americans' Dragon's anti-tank missiles, meaning they're going to either have to move up with a blitz move or stay in place in their foxholes and try to weather their shooting. Well, this BMP-2 company also moved out from behind the woods, also out of range of the Americans' missiles. Since they moved, they could not fire their own anti-tank guided missiles, and they're just waiting for next turn, knowing they have a little bit of daylight to play with. The Soviet Hinds were called forward, with the Americans already exposed in the middle, and the VADs over on the Americans' left flank, in order to try to take some opportunity shots while they still could at those M1 tanks on the far side of the board. But the Soviets opened fire with their T-72s, having moved up and firing through this cornfield, needing fives to hit. One of the tanks landed a shot and made his firepower check, destroying the lead 113 on the Americans' left. While the tank commander and his wingman to the left managed to score one hit against the Abrams, which failed its armor, but then, surprisingly, the Soviets failed its firepower check, bailing them out. These two Hinds, though, after braving severe 50 cal fire and also small machine gun fire from the Americans over here, making 4 out of 5 invul saves at one point, managed to destroy one of the M1s and force the other one to bail out as well. So the Americans' center is going to be forced with the morale check to see if they bug out or if they stay to defend their objectives. We'll be back with American Turn 2. The tough luck for the Americans continued into Turn 2 as this M1 tank failed to remount. But, in a bit of good news, the Americans did pass the morale check, with the tank commander then pushing forward in order to engage that T-72. Firing 2 shots, he hit once. The Soviet tank rolled a 4 on its armor save, meaning that wasn't a penetrating hit, but it was a glancing hit. This time the M1 did make its firepower check, so this hapless tank crew is bailed out for a second time this game. Using the commander's leadership over here, the infantry platoon moved forward at a blitz move, which means that they count as not moving. That enabled them to fire their Dragon missiles. Unfortunately for them, the 2 missiles that hit that T-72, needing 4s to hit because they were firing through more than 2 inches of cover, and also because of that building, failed to penetrate the Soviet armor. While this missile team failed to hit one of the BMP-2s out in the open. The VADS platoon attempted to move out of cover, one of which bogged down, rolling a 2. The other one did make it out and fired its 4 shots up into the Hinds, but only hit 1 time, needing 3s. That 1 time wasn't enough, as the Hind helicopter pilots seemed especially well trained tonight and were managed to dodge the gunfire with a simple invul save. Over on left, this 113 company decided that a little bit of smartness was a better part of valor, moved out from over there where the BMP-2s were lining up with their missile shots, and have retreated to behind the woods, again waiting for nightfall, while this infantry platoon remained in place in their foxholes rather than trying to move forward at this point. So with that, the Americans are in a bit of trouble. Soviets are pushing forward in the middle, and their BMP-2s are in range with all their missile systems. Let's see what kind of targets they have. A mixed round for the Soviets. Started out with enough luck, with that tank crew right there remounting for the second time this battle. The tank commander is trailing in the rear. I thought about using stabilizers in order to push up past the Americans' front armor, but that would have taken them using their stabilizers and then out of command range. making it 6s to hit. I decided to keep them back a little bit and relied on being at very close range to penetrate the American armor. Everyone in the rear remained in place so they could start firing off their anti-tank missiles, while those two Hinds got out of range of that bat, just barely. So in the shooting phase, began with opening up with these three tanks in the center at that M1. Managed to bail him out, only hit once. He made a 4 on the armor save, which meant that it was a glancing hit, and the Soviets did make the firepower check. This tank right here was able to hit that tank in the rear that was already bailed out, but he made his armor save, even though he was at close range as well. This BMP-2 platoon needs to get ranged in, trying to hit these Americans who are considered gone to ground right now because they did not shoot or move in their last movement phase, need 5s to hit. Missed all 4 times. But this, the BMP-2 assigned to the battalion commander, perhaps in the shot of a lifetime, fired over the cornfield and just managed to hit that VADS. VADS, of course, had no way to save on armor, but unfortunately for the BMP-2, he failed his firepower check, which means he's just bailed out. Over on the left, these BMP-2s also failed to hit any of those 113s. Would have liked to shot the infantry, but as they're no longer in foxholes, they're no longer valid targets for the guided missiles. The Hinds did manage to do some things for us, as they hit that tank there twice, again surviving a whole bunch of anti-aircraft fire from the Americans who just couldn't hit them. Hit them twice, and the Soviets made one save, and the Americans failed the 5+ firepower check, and all the rifles did nothing. Managed to score a glancing hit on that M1, who was already bailed out. He failed his remount check, which meant that he threw a frag grenade or he destroyed his tank and retreated off the battle. So, Soviets are in pretty good position. Once again, the American M1 platoon is going to be faced with a morale check to start their turn. The good news for them is, it's almost nighttime. The turn started poorly for the Americans, with the tank commander failing his morale check, throwing his thermal grenade into the tank, and leaving the battlefield. That leaves these T-72s almost invulnerable, save for the American Dragon missiles. With that in mind, the American commander used his skill once again to reposition his guys using a blitz move, making sure they were all outside of 8 inches. 1 having clear line of sight, 2 firing through the cornfield. The one with a clear line of sight, of course, missed, but one of the 2 Dragons that didn't have as good a line of sight did hit on a 4-up, and surprisingly, this hapless T-72 failed its armor save. Perhaps it was all the other hits they had taken earlier in the battle. With that one, the Americans were able to roll a 3-up in order to destroy the tank. Unfortunately for the American left, this Dragon missile team was not so accurate. Nor were these 2, who loosed some fire into the the Soviets hiding in those trees. This 113 platoon, knowing that the battle was going against them, decided to move forward at terrain dash speed, making sure they stayed more than 8 inches away from any Soviet Union units. This 113 platoon would have also liked to have moved at terrain dash speed, but with that tank there, was unable to do so. The bright spot for the Soviets, but perhaps too late, were the 2 VADs who came out after he remounted, fired 8 shots at the Soviets, hitting on 4 times. This time the Soviet pilots, not so lucky, failed all 4 of their saves, and then the Americans made firepower checks against both Hinds, bringing them down. So, will the Soviets be able to press their advantage into a victory, or will nighttime save the Americans from a defeat? We'll see Soviet turn 3. With daylight quickly running out, Soviet forces looked to press their advantage. These 3 BMP-2s remained in place, firing 4 missiles into that 113 platoon, only hitting once, needing 5s to hit, of course, because they're in cover, and then failing the firepower check of that lead 113, bailing him out. So they are still in good standing. In the center, the T-72s, the lead T-72 uses stabilizers to really push it to the Americans. He is now within 4 inches of that objective, meaning that the Americans cannot push off the T-72s, that the Soviets will be victorious. These two T-72s shot left into the VADs, managed to destroy one after hitting once. Well, these BMP-2s, realizing that their main guns would be the best against the Americans' 113s, move forward. These three, if they would move 10 inches, would have been, next to, in line with, that one on the left. But rather than do that and shoot through 2 inches of cover, I went ahead and used their stabilizers to push them all the way up to the edge of cover, knowing that they would need 5s regardless. The one in the clear missed, but 2 of these 3 managed to hit, each firing 2 shots. One firepower went through, the other one did not. So 113 is bailed out, 1 is destroyed. The Americans now will see if the night has come, rolling 2d6 and needing a 5 or above, but will it matter? They're going to need to push these T-72s off that objective. No easy task for an American infantry platoon. The sun has still not set on the battlefield as the American turn 4 is complete. All 3 American vehicles managed to remount there, this VADS, and that 113. This 113 platoon moved up, spraying a hail of bullets into the infantry there, but failing to kill any. And these Dragon missile teams managed to hit once, and the Soviets failed their 3+ save, but the Dragon proved ineffective and was unable to make its firepower check. Over on the right, also opening up with the 113s against these BMP-2s, this lead one managed to hit that BMP-2 twice, and rolling a 1 on its armor save, but the Americans failed the firepower yet again, only managing to bail it out. These 113s are going to have a limited lifespan. The Americans were banking on its Dragon missile teams to do some damage to these tanks, but again failed. Very difficult for the Americans to hit the Soviets, it would seem. But these American brave infantrymen that they are did manage to assault. All 3 Soviet tanks opened up with defensive fire, but only managed to score 4 hits, and the Americans were undeterred. While the Americans couldn't do any damage to the Soviets due to the BDD armor, they were able to drive them off. The Soviets failed their 4+ they needed in order to counterattack. So at least at this point, the Soviets have not won. But the situation remains dire for the Americans as we roll 3d6 looking for a 5 or above for nighttime to finally fall on the battlefield. Unbelievably, night has still not fallen on the battlefield. The Soviets pressed their advantage, moving these BMP-2s up. 2 on the right use their stabilizers in order to make sure they could get clean shots, need 6s to hit. These guys move normally, need 5s to hit. And the BMP-2 assigned to the battalion commander moved out as well. In total, they managed to bail out all 3 American M113s, which will force a morale check for them coming soon. These BMP-2s stayed in place, getting their full 3 shots each. End results was 1 M113 destroyed and 2 bailed out. Americans did a good job of making their remount checks because they were forced to do, having taken so many hits from the Soviets in this phase. But in the center is where it's all at. The T-72s opened up with their machine guns. The Americans, luckily, were in cover, including the Dragon missile team. He was in cover and concealment, and had gone to ground because he did not shoot or do anything last time. So they needed 5s to hit. They did end up killing 1 American before assaulting and driving them back from the objective. But this might actually play to the Americans' favor, as now the Americans can counter-assault into the Soviets on their turn, having not moved or shot, meaning Soviets will get no defensive fire as Americans pop out of the woods to try to drive them back once more and stave off defeat here today.
That's a direct order. Do it now.
Nighttime still has not fallen, and the Americans almost pulled off the play of a lifetime. Well, these 113s failed their morale check. These 113s managed to pass theirs, but 2 of the crew remained stubborn and did not remount their vehicles. The one that did fired some 50 caliber machine gun fire at that BMP-2, but to no effect. But what you really want to know about is what happened down here. It was extremely exciting as the Americans assaulted out of the woods undetected by the Soviet tanks. No overwatch was fired. What transpired after that was a series of back and forth between the Americans and the Soviets, each needing a 4+ in order to stay in the fight. Neither one doing damage to each other, but knowing that the first one to fail would probably lose this battle for their side. The reason why? Those 3 Dragon teams hit twice. The Soviets failed their armor, with their BDD armor being a 13 to the Dragon's 18. One penetrated and one glanced. The one that penetrated, unfortunately, failed firepower check, but the one that glanced did make its firepower check. So both those tanks were bailed out, which meant if this tank would have retreated, those 2 infantry squads would have destroyed those 2 T-72s. It would have been epic. That's what happened. The Americans pulled back first, but still the Americans had hopes. With 2 of the 3 T-72s out of order, the remaining T-72 had to make a morale check. That right there is the 3, which won the Soviets the game. It could have gone either way at the end. Although the Soviets were definitely pressing forward against the Americans, the Soviets were really hoping these T-72s could win the game for them, and they did at the end of the day. Very exciting. I think it was unfortunate for the Americans to lose their M1 so early in the game. Some bad armor rolls for them and some bad gunnery for them sealed their fate. But nonetheless, lots and lots of fun. Hope you enjoyed this Team Yankee report. We'll do some more skirmish battle reports and have Simon back on the channel to continue our campaign. So stay tuned for more battle reports from the War Corgi YouTube channel.